Something very important that I think people need to understand about Jesus Christ and the disciples. And one of those things is that Jesus is referred to as a rabbi. So, sure, his disciples called him the Son of God too, but the type of relationship that they had with Jesus Christ, his disciples, was the type of relationships that followers of a rabbi at that time had. And what I mean by that is when you look at Jewish people, it's very unique, is all of the young men were actually boys at that time. They're taught to memorize the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. And then after that, when they reach adulthood, which for them was like 13 years old, they had an option to go into different occupations. But if they choose to be a rabbi, then they will they'll go to rabbinic school and they will be under a rabbi where they will basically follow that rabbi. They will live with that rabbi. They will be taught by that rabbi. Everything they do is to mimic that rabbi. Okay? So after they learn the Torah and they choose to be a rabbi, then they'll be taught to learn big chunks or as much as they can of the rest of the Old Testament, and also memorize the main teachings or as much of the teachings as they can of their rabbi, and to conduct themselves in that same manner as their rabbi, to live and mimic their rabbi, and to make other rabbis like the rabbi that they had, because now they mimic that rabbi. So when they have new followers, they're going to pretty much teach the same thing, right? So when you look at the type of relationship that Jesus Christ had with his disciples, it was that. They lived with Jesus Christ like you would with a rabbi back in those days. They memorized and try to remember most of what Jesus Christ said and did, or at least the important things. That's what the disciples did. That's what you see in the Gospels and the New Testament. And they wrote that decades after Jesus Christ died, resurrected, and went to heaven, flew up to heaven. So when you even look at the prior lives of these disciples before Jesus, like Peter was a fisherman, so he had a lot of aggressions, and the way he would talk, he was mean and aggressive, and you had these other disciples, their lifestyles were outside of what they were after Jesus. But when you look at their life after Jesus Christ, they were completely different, totally different man, especially Apostle Paul. So what do we see? We see that when you understand the full relationship between a disciple and a rabbi, and you apply that to disciples with Jesus Christ, we see the New Testament, how much more real and full truth that is. And that's why these men, there were 11 disciples after Jesus Christ died and was crucified and resurrected and went up to heaven, and then Apostle Paul became the 12. So 12 out of 12 for the rest of their lives served Jesus Christ. And 11 out of 12 died for their service of Jesus Christ. And all they had to do is retract what they said about Jesus to live. That's all they had to do, is just retract it and say, no, Jesus is not the Son of God. Jesus is not God in the flesh. It's not God in the flesh. And they would have lived, but they chose not to, because of the things that they witnessed and experienced living with Jesus and learning from Jesus. Apostle Paul was no exception to it. And so that explains the realness and truthness of the New Testament. And that's why you have the New Testament books set the way it is, and those other Gnostic texts thrown out, because it's not what the disciples knew. Just like that stuff would have been thrown out if you looked at other rabbis and someone, in the same situation as Jesus, and you had these Gnostic texts, people claiming this about that rabbi, but the original followers of those rabbis say, no, that's not what it is. And people would have respected that because they knew the type of relationship there is between the rabbi and the followers, that the followers live with the rabbi, follows the rabbi, learns from the rabbi, mimics the lifestyle of the rabbi, teaches the same thing that the rabbi taught them. And that also explains why a lot of the Jews at the time did not follow Jesus Christ. Even after all the miracles, even after being crucified and resurrected, and all the miracles that the disciples followed, because of that close bond and relationship of rabbi to follower. And that's why a lot of the Jews didn't convert to Christianity, even though you had so much power and evidence and miracles. But yet, you can also, that explains why the disciples were so dedicated. And also because they witnessed it. And that's why they had that heart, that profound message to spread it all over the world. And their goals were to make disciples like themselves to continue. So yeah, that's just something that I wanted to, put out there. And I hope that helps you have a stronger reliance and belief and confidence in the New Testament, what it teaches, what it says, and your relationship with Jesus Christ. And that you will follow those leads to be like those disciples, to be like Jesus, to live that way, and then make disciples of your own. But not of your own, but to bring them into the family of Christ, and for this process to continue on. All right.